This redress scheme comes after years of shocking headlines and devastating revelations. It comes after the bravery of countless survivors telling their stories, after incredible work by journalists and researchers, after a deeply flawed commission of investigation and a consultation process run by the current minister. After all of that, I think it's simply unbelievable that the scheme does not do survivors justice. After everything they've been through, the very least they deserve is a comprehensive scheme that properly compensates them for the state's violation of their human rights. It should include all survivors. It should properly recognise years of trauma with a dignified payment process, and it should strengthen people's rights to seek justice. And it should have a clear path to hold individuals, religious orders and pharmaceutical companies to account. Minister, I cannot comprehend why your scheme is so deficient. It's exclusionary, insufficient and contrary to the findings of your own consultation. Earlier this week, I raised the significant issues of the exclusion of survivors based on the arbitrary 6-month barrier and the limiting of institutions, the requirement of survivors to sign a legal waiver and the lack of accountability. There are several matters I did not get to raise properly on Tuesday, and I'd like to address them now. Firstly, the payment rates. The government's documents state that it is not possible to monetise the suffering or the losses experienced, and that the financial payment represents a contribution acknowledging the hurt and the suffering. The reality is that any scheme of this nature involves monetary amounts, but these rates are quite frankly disgraceful. €5,000 for mothers, and only mothers, who spent less than 3 months in an institution. €5,000. It's hard to comprehend this number when the courts award individuals multiples of that amount for slips and falls. There is no rationale for this amount. The interdepartmental group's report gives some context, and then the figures just appear. How are these figures reached? Is there any explanation for that? When you consider the gravity of the crimes committed and the trauma and suffering as a result, and then €5,000. Furthermore, the scheme has no mention of pensions, nothing about periodic payments, and most pressingly, immediate interim payments. The Oak report, commissioned by the Minister, has been completely disregarded in this respect. Speaking on Tuesday and today, Minister, you referenced the consultation only when it suited you. You asked survivors to engage with the process, to again share details of their abuse. 561 individuals participated in good faith, of which 62% were children when in these institutions and 25% were mothers. They called for an immediate interim payment, enhanced pension or periodic payments, particularly for those who would not qualify for contributory pension due to their life circumstances, assessment of additional sums based on separate categories of harm suffered by individuals, and free genetic testing and health screening to compensate for the lack of family medical history. None of these features in the scheme. Instead, there is a general payment and a separate category for work payment, which is very narrowly defined and does not reflect the scale of labour mothers and children were forced into. In your closing statement, Minister, can you please outline why you have chosen to ignore these aspects of the Oak report? Why were survivors put through another emotionally and psychologically stressful process only to be disregarded? Why did you even decide to carry out a consultation if you're only going to ignore the findings of it? My second point also relates to how the government and civil service understand, or more accurately, misunderstand, reparation schemes. The Minister has explained to us that this will be the largest scheme of its kind in the history of the state in terms of the number of beneficiaries. This suggests that the scheme is implicitly good because of its scale. But let's be clear about this. The scheme is the largest of its kind because of the number of people involved, because of the wrongs perpetuated by this state in conjunction with religious orders against young mothers, especially the more vulnerable, and children. This is not supposed to be an act of kindness. It's supposed to be an act of justice. The government is not giving survivors compensation. It is providing what is owed to them. Unfortunately, it is falling so far short of what is right. Part of the justification of the scheme and its low payments is that survivors will not be subject to an adversarial system. You keep saying this. The interdepartmental group's report reveals the mindset that still pervades in the civil service, which the government seems happy to go along with. They can only conceive two options: either take a small set amount or go through an adversarial process. In other words, if you're seeking justice for human rights abuses, for family separations, for forced labour, or for racial and ethnic abuse, you will have to prove it. There is no mention of a system whereby reparations are based on believing survivors, that we accept the trauma and abuse they suffered. We all know what happened in those institutions. Of course we believe them now. That we trust them to give an honest account and be compensated accordingly. Why isn't that option considered in terms of redress? There are no words. While this scheme is disgraceful and glaringly ignores perspectives of survivors on specific issues, it is still only a draft. The Minister has indicated a willingness to improve the scheme before the legislation is presented. So, Minister, today, will you commit to the following for the sake of the thousands of survivors and their families, many of whom are watching these proceedings very carefully? Firstly, remove the outrageous requirement for individuals to have spent at least 6 months as a child in an institution. Remove the legal waiver. Allow survivors the right to both a small amount of money and to seek proper legal redress. Allow individuals from all known mother and baby and county institutions to be eligible. Commit to increasing the set payment and providing a non-adversarial process for individuals to receive additional amounts reflecting the abuse and harm they suffered. Immediately bring interim non-conditional payments, and finally commit to holding religious orders and pharmaceutical companies accountable.